We are broadcasting from Lund University, and every day we interview researchers on topics that are related in one way or another to the corona crisis. Today I have Marina Svensson by my side. Welcome.
Thank you.
You are a professor in Asian Studies and a China expert.
Yes.
The virus broke out in China, and how would you characterize the efforts of the government, the Chinese government, and how they have handled the crisis and their version about the outbreak?
Well, it has changed over time. So initially, China was very slow to react for various reasons. They were kind of not letting the population know and not letting the world know, and actually tried to hide the outbreak and silenced some doctors in Wuhan, which was the epicenter of the outbreak. And also initially were not very forthcoming to the World Health Organization. So the government lost a momentum of several weeks, actually. And then, of course, later they acted very forcefully, and Wuhan, which is a big city of 11 million people, were put under lockdown. And this was around the Chinese New Year, which prevented people from traveling to Wuhan and from Wuhan. So at that time, China acted very forcefully and also seemingly got the outbreak under control with a lot of sacrifice from a lot of people. So that what we know, and then of course the statistics is perhaps not very reliable, but what China has said is that only 3,000 people died, which is not a lot when you think about China's population of 1.3 billion people. So in that sense, China was slow to react, but when it did react, it reacted very forcefully.
You have also done research on Chinese social media. Can you say something about the discussions in this Chinese social media about the coronavirus?
So social media has been very important for people, and a lot of other digital platforms for people to connect with each other, and also for people to mobilize, to help each other, support each other. Young people who have used social media to network, and in the beginning also to collect masks and other equipment that was needed. But then, of course, the Chinese government, as always, is also censoring things. So when you're criticizing the government, people are blocked from using the social media. And that was what happened to one of the doctors in Wuhan, Li Wenliang, who was criticized for voicing his concern about the outbreak before it was sort of a public news. So there has been censorship, but people are also using social media, and video blogging, for example, have been very important to get information out. But people who are very critical, they are silenced on social media.
So the Chinese civil society, they are using the social media as well?
Yes, definitely. And we've seen that in the past as well in terms of crisis, that people, it can be organizations, but it can also be a network of people who know each other and who use it. And particularly encouraging has also been discussions about press freedom on social media. People asking for transparency, people asking for press freedom, asking the media to be able to report. And that has been quite encouraging sign. Calling the doctor who was silenced a whistleblower. So this kind of triggered this discussion that had been very quiet for a long time. So it was a support of media. And there were some good media who did try to do as good as they could reporting from Wuhan in the beginning.
One of the keys to success in the Chinese handling of the coronavirus has been the use of apps to detect people who to trace the people who are sick. Has there been any discussions in China that these kinds of apps are controlling people, and is there any negative discussions about them?
Well, in China, people are very used to using apps and social media, and also paying using different kind of apps. And people are also very used to being controlled and surveilled by the government. So in that sense, people have been more readily accepting these apps for the public good, and that's how it, of course, is framed. But you can also see the use of app and other surveillance technologies as part of the building up of a surveillance society in China, which we have seen particularly in Xinjiang, where it has been used against minorities and also against dissidents. But the ironical thing is, of course, then that these kind of apps or similar kind of apps are now being implemented in many countries in democracies, in many democratic countries. And then also the same kind of argument, we need to use that for the public good. And that raises a lot of warnings also for surveillance and governments amassing a lot of data, not only about people's health or movements, but other data as well. So it's a big issue.
So do you see any big difference in how China is handling the crisis compared to the Western world? When we're both using apps, not all of us, but some countries.
Well, that's also, again, one of the ironical things, that in the beginning China was criticized quite a lot for its lockdown and for forcing people to stay at home. And now, as the virus is spreading, a lot of countries are implementing rather similar tools. And that can tell us something about the virus and the difficulties of controlling it, but also that both authoritarian countries and democratic countries are maybe at some point needing to use the same kind of tools, although there are differences, as we know from the context of Sweden compared to other countries. So this is an interesting development, that China is not so different in some aspects when it comes to methods.
China is now donating medical protection materials to different parts of the world. How do you think that we should look upon this gesture?
One should remember that in the beginning, when the virus was only in China, a lot of European countries and other countries were donating also equipment to China. And China is also, of course, now that they are restarting their factories, also one of the biggest sort of exporters of this kind of material. And that they are also both selling increasingly, but also donating is not strange. I mean, there have been critique of China using this as a soft power tool. There's also been critique of some of the equipment not being substandard. But I don't think it's strange in itself, no.
Can you see now, happening now, any changing in the global order, that there is a shift in power in the world?
It's maybe a little bit too early to tell, and it of course depends how quickly this virus and its economic costs are brought in under control in different countries. But it's obvious that China looks stronger because it has controlled the virus, whereas countries like the US looks not to be in control of what is happening in the country. And there's also, of course, a lot of fears that the whole development will weaken democracies and be something that authoritarian regimes, not only China but others, are also exploiting. And also dangers that after Corona we will see a much more, not as a globalized world, and people will be more nationalistic and looking at their own countries. That's the negative side, and the more positive side might be also that this crisis illustrates that people need to collaborate and countries need to collaborate. But the verdict is out. It's too early to say what the world after Corona will look like.
How do you think that the Chinese relative success in handling the virus, how has it impacted on their self-image, the self-image of the Chinese people?
I think in the beginning, when the crisis were at its worst in China, people were very critical of the government. And that's what we saw also on social media. But now, as people got some perspective and when they see how things are developing in different countries around the globe, people are become more confident that China did the right thing. So it has also changed over time. But then again, it's too early to tell. It depends how quickly Western countries are dealing with this crisis or solving it, and whether or not China will see a second round of the epidemic in China, which we also see some signs of.
Some countries, for example the US, they have tried to identify the virus as the Chinese virus. What has been the reactions in China upon this?
Well, there's been some American politicians who talked about a China virus or a Wuhan virus, and that of course is extremely problematic, and that has provoked a lot of counter-reaction also, and actually also some accusations that the virus didn't originate in Wuhan. It was not Chinese behind it. It was even some speculations that it were foreign or American soldiers in Wuhan. Absolutely not true, but these kind of discussions have been up there among certain individuals.
Mm. And one last question, how has, there are many Chinese students abroad, also in Sweden, how has the reaction been among them?
I think, of course, it differs among them, and also depending on the country where they are. But there's been a lot of reports about, particularly their parents wanting them to come back to China because they feel China is safer these days than being in the US or the UK. So I think quite a few students have returned to China. And also there's been speculations about the recruitment of Chinese students to Western universities in the future, if there will be less students. But it also depends how deep this crisis will be.
Mm. Thank you, Marina Svensson. More news about the coronavirus can be found at www.lu.se.